Here's one truly cinematic, absolutely bonkers World War II story we guarantee your history class didn't teach you: the unlikely events of the Battle of Castle Itter. Nazis and the Allies banding together to defend a German prison against the SS. Does it get any more crazy? By April 1945, it was clear that the Allies would win World War II. By late 44, they'd driven back the Nazis from significant parts of the Netherlands, Belgium, and France, while also occupying some sections of Germany. In February 1945, assured of victory, the leaders of the Allied powerhouses of the US, UK, and USSR met at the Yalta Conference to discuss post-war arrangements for Europe. A month earlier, Adolf Hitler had retreated to his bunker to escape the Soviet troops who were laying waste to Berlin. As for old Adolf, well, you know how he played it.
He had promised that he would never be captured alive. He also said he was not going to leave Berlin, that he realized this was his fate.
So in the week or so between Hitler's death and the Nazi surrender on May 8th, VE Day, the remnants of the German fighting forces were basically left to fend for themselves. Ground-level enlisted troops in the Nazi army, known as the Wehrmacht, abandoned their posts in the name of personal survival. But then there were the members of the SS, the hardcore Nazi secret police. A handful of die-hard SS men who still believed in the Nazi cause roamed the Austrian countryside looking for a fight. In 1940, 2 years after Nazi Germany annexed Austria, the Reich made an agreement with the owner of the 9th century castle Itter to use it for military purposes. But in 1943, the Nazis stopped being polite and just seized the place to use it as a prison. Officially, Castle Itter was one of the many satellites of the Dachau concentration camp complex, which was about 90 miles away in Germany. Castle Itter wasn't set up to be a death camp. It was a place to hold French prisoners who were more valuable alive than dead. The Nazis held certain inmates as sort of human war trophies, with several held at Castle Itter, including former French Prime Minister Edouard Daladier and Marie-Agnès Callao, the sister of exiled French Prime Minister Charles de Gaulle, as well as high-ranking members of the French resistance and several celebrities, including French tennis champion Jean Bourtrot, who was very famous at the time. With the war lost and their leader dead by his own hand, the morale of the SS men in charge of the castle prison was super low. Considering the genocide, torture, and other crimes against humanity they'd committed in Hitler's name, even the most hardcore Nazis had to be thinking about the reckoning they'd soon be facing at Allied hands, and their behavior reflected their lack of motivation. The prison's ranking SS officer, Commandant Sebastian Wimmer, asked his maintenance man, Zvonimir Kukovic, to run an errand for him in a nearby town. Except Kukovic wasn't SS, a Nazi, or even German. He was a prisoner, a Croatian communist forced into working for Wimmer. No dummy, he seized the opportunity and skated, embarking on a treacherous 40-mile bicycle journey southwest through the Austrian Alps. Aware of Allied troop movements via a hidden radio at the prison, Kukovic arrived in Innsbruck on the day the Allies liberated it. He approached the U.S. Army's 103rd Infantry Division with a letter from the other prisoners, written in English, asking them to liberate the prison at Castle Itter. The next day, May 4, 1945, the 103rd Infantry headed out to do just that, but they were driven back by heavy shelling at the hands of a small group of Nazi troops. Meanwhile, after Kukovic failed to return, Commandant Wimmer bolted too, assuming, wisely this time, that his maintenance man had gone off in search of Allied troops to attack Castle Itter. Once Wimmer deserted, the other SS troops under his command followed suit. With the guards all gone, Castle Itter had technically been liberated by default. There was no one left to keep the scores of mostly French prisoners from leaving, but they didn't know exactly what was happening outside the castle walls. While the SS officers on the grounds had left, they worried that Nazi soldiers might still be surrounding the prison. To run for it could get them shot when the end of the war was so close within reach. They knew Kukovic was out there somewhere with their plea for help, but they had no idea whether or not he'd made it to the Allies to deliver the message. And the prisoners knew there were still some SS officers roaming around, still ready to die for their already dead, now martyred Führer.
Our greatest days, they lie ahead. Sieg Heil.
Yeah, like that stuff. This is going to factor into the story in a sec. So, the safest thing for the inmates was to shelter in place, arming themselves with the weapons the SS had left behind. The prisoners had become the defenders of their own prison. To find out what was going on outside the prison, the inmates sent out Andreas Krobat, a Czech prisoner who worked as the cook, to gather intel and try and find help. He grabbed a bicycle left behind by the SS and rode into the village of Vorgol, about 5 miles away. Kukovic had considered heading there, but was almost recaptured by Nazi soldiers. When Krobat arrived in Vorgol, it wasn't in Allied hands, but the large group of Wehrmacht troops once stationed there had abandoned the town. A mere 10 Nazi artillerymen had stuck around, but they'd lost their will to fight for Hitler, and along with their commanding officer, Major Josef Gangl, they actually agreed to join the Castle Itter defense squad. Also in Borgel, Krobot hooked up with the Austrian resistance. The unlikely coalition of renounced Nazi soldiers, anti-Nazi Austrians, and a Czech prisoner voted to make the war-tested Gangl its leader. Gangl then gave his orders: free the village of Itter, then await American troop reinforcements and secure the castle. It didn't take long for Gangl's ragtag collection, along with the French prisoners, to find the American personnel and weaponry it needed to defend Castle Itter. They were still under imminent threat from surrounding SS forces. The group drove into the nearby town of Kufstein, which had been freed by the 23rd Tank Battalion of the 12th Armored Division of the U.S. 21st Corps, commanded by Lieutenant John C. Lee. The unit was still in Kufstein along with 5 tanks. An unlikely alliance of Lieutenant Lee and 14 American troops, Gangl, a driver, and a number of ex-Nazis headed back to the castle with a truck and 5 US tanks. But the castle was only accessible via a rickety old bridge. To prevent a bridge collapse, they sent 1 tank back to Kufstein, but they still had more than enough firepower to fight off their first challengers, a group of SS officers who attempted to block the road up to the castle. Enemy lines were really being redrawn by this point, as those left inside the former prison pressed another reformed Nazi into a position of authority. SS officer Kurt Siegfried Schrader, who'd been injured on the battlefield, spent his recovery near Castle Itter. While there, he became such good friends with the inmates that he fell out of love with Nazism. And seeing as how he was the most seasoned military veteran on the premises, Schrader was a logical choice to head up the Castle Itter defense. Schrader was up to the job, although he was reportedly concerned, if not full-on frightened, when Lieutenant Lee's battalion showed up at the castle entrance. After making it clear that they were all on the same side, the 2 camps coordinated their efforts and formulated a plan. Schrader ordered his motley unit to stand guard outside the castle. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Lee positioned his own tank, Visat and Jenny, at the gates of Castle Itter. When morning broke on May 5, 1945, about 150 troops from the Waffen-SS, one of the last actively fighting Nazi units in Europe, arrived at Castle Itter to reclaim the prison. These were the hardest of hardcores and had no intention of letting anybody off the hook. So it's crazy. All-in Nazi SS storming a castle made up of Germans, Austrians, and Americans, trying to save a bunch of high-ranking French. But the cobbled-together force of prisoners, resistors, American troops, and ex-Nazis held their own, preventing the invaders from entering the castle while suffering only minimal casualties. One thing that the castle denizens did run out of, and quickly at that, was ammunition. They needed reinforcements in the form of both fighters and weaponry, and so Lieutenant Lee put out a call to the 142nd Infantry Unit. But during the communication, the SS cut the line. The American troops on the other end only had a basic understanding of what was going on, and not much instruction nor specific needs had been conveyed. For the 142nd to be effective, they'd have to get the full story. So inmate and tennis superstar Jean Borotra offered to deliver it and bring the troops back with him to Castle Itter. The former world-class athlete got out of the castle by vaulting over the outer wall, then ran through a corridor of SS troops. It's worth mentioning that yes, Borotra was a top athlete. Keyword was. He was in his 40s at the time and had been sitting in a castle for a couple of years, so it's not like he was in his top training condition. They fired directly at him and from a fairly close distance, but somehow Borotra managed to avoid getting shot and he traveled on foot to the American troops' staging location. He was part of the brigade when it approached Castle Itter, looking to strike the SS attackers from behind. Borotra guided the 142nd to Castle Itter, where they arrived at about 4 p.m., and apparently in the absolute nick of time, because the defenders had completely run out of ammo. The SS troops attempting to attack and enter the castle were forced to turn their attention to the well-armed American squadron coming up the road behind them, but their efforts were easily squelched by the 142nd. Just before nightfall, the battle was over. About 50 SS attackers had been killed, and the 100 or so survivors were captured and transported off to enter the World War II program for German prisoners of war.
Ooh, that's a bingo!
Through a series of extremely unlikely events and alliances, Castle Itter had been defended and liberated. As for those held as prisoners before the Battle of Castle Itter, they were all immediately evacuated to Paris, then sent home or to a safe location. The fact that none of the high-priority prisoners died in the skirmish is pretty amazing. At one point during the heaviest of the gunfire, former French Prime Minister Paul Reynaud was in a pretty bad spot. Major Josef Gangl recognized the situation and sprang into action. He got Reynaud to safety, but a sniper's bullet took Gangl out. He was among the few casualties suffered by the castle defenders and posthumously named an official national hero of Austria. And back in the US, Lieutenant John C. Lee was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for his efforts. 2 days after the Battle for Castle Itter, Germany surrendered to the Allied forces. Amazingly, the Battle of Castle Itter wasn't the only time during World War II when the German and Allied troops found themselves on the same side. Just a few days before the Austrian castle was secured, Operation Cowboy took place in Hostau, which at the time was part of the German-governed Sudetenland, now located in the Czech Republic. When Nazi Germany acquired Austria in 1938, it moved a group of Lipizaners, famed dressage and show horses housed in Vienna.
I did send some of the younger stallions to the country.
That country would be to a farm in Hostau. Just as the Nazis intended to create a master race of ideal Aryan humans, they also wanted to breed perfect horses. By the end of April 1945, the Soviet Red Army was marching in from the east at virtually the same time that the American 12th Corps, led by General George Patton, was heading in from the west. The two sides were competing to liberate the city of Prague from Nazi control. While most people generally don't eat horses, the Americans who got there first believed that the depleted Soviets would eat the prized Lipizaners or use them as work animals. And so they met with the head of the farm's riding school, Alois Podolsky. The Americans and Nazis then teamed up to evacuate the horses while under attack by Waffen SS troops before the Soviets even arrived.